What happens when the cameras are rolling, the lights are blazing, and a figure walks in who wasn't supposed to be there? The kind of figure that stirs both fascination and fury. A duchess who traded palaces for Hollywood and then dared to show up at the MTV Video Music Awards uninvited. Imagine the silence of expectation breaking into a roar of boos. Imagine heckles slicing through the air while every phone in the audience rises to capture the chaos. That was the scene when Meghan Markle made her unannounced arrival at the VMAs in 2025. And from the very first second, you could feel the electricity crackle in the air, not of admiration, but of rejection. Why does this matter? Why are we even talking about it? Because this wasn't just a celebrity being booed. This was the unraveling of a carefully constructed image. Meghan Markle has spent years presenting herself as a woman wronged by the monarchy, misunderstood by the press, a truth-teller silenced by tradition. But on this night, in a hall filled with the loudest voices in pop culture, the world didn't buy it. And that truth hit harder than any headline. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But let's rewind. Before the boos echoed and the heckles erupted, before Meghan was caught in the blinding spotlight of rejection, there was anticipation. The VMAs are not like the Oscars or the BAFTAs. This is not a black tie affair where everyone quietly applauds. This is the arena of spectacle, drama, and raw audience reaction. Here, moments go viral in seconds. Think back to Kanye interrupting Taylor Swift, Miley swinging on a wrecking ball, Britney, and Madonna's kiss. The VMAs thrive on chaos. The audience expects it, but rarely has someone walked in and unwittingly become the chaos. Now, imagine Meghan stepping out of a car. No official red carpet slot. No welcome host ushering her in. Just her entourage, and the boldness to walk into one of the most watched music events of the year without an invitation. Already, the atmosphere was strange. Security guards looked confused. Paparazzi didn't know whether to flash or to frown. And the fans? They weren't lining up to scream her name. They were whispering, exchanging looks, pulling out phones in curiosity. You could almost hear the question ripple through the air. What is she doing here? But here's the contradiction. Meghan has always insisted she belongs in Hollywood. She's claimed her story resonates with the power players of film, television, and music. She believed this was her crowd. After all, she's been photographed with A-listers before. Oprah, Tyler Perry, Serena Williams. These were the names she aligned herself with. So why wouldn't she be welcome at the VMAs? Why wouldn't she step in as if the spotlight was hers to claim? To Meghan, it may have felt natural. To the audience, it felt presumptuous. And that's where the storm began to brew. Now picture this. Inside the venue, the crowd was buzzing with energy. Performers like Ariana Grande and Taylor Swift had fans screaming at deafening levels. Every entrance was met with cheers, chants, applause. Then, without warning, Meghan appeared in the entryway. She smiled, poised, radiating the kind of grace she had perfected during her royal years. But this wasn't Westminster Abbey. This was the VMAs. And instead of cheers, the sound was different. It began faintly, a murmur, a rustle, a few scattered jeers. But like a spark hitting dry grass, it spread. Louder, sharper, unmistakable. Boo, boo, boo. The kind of sound you can't mistake, the kind of rejection that cuts through glamour like a knife. And it wasn't just one or two voices. It was a wave. Meghan's smile faltered, just for a second, before she forced it back into place. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. The moment was immortalized before she had even taken 5 steps inside. Let me ask you something. What would you do if an entire room turned against you? Would you run? Would you fight? Or would you pretend it wasn't happening? Meghan chose the last option. She waved, lifted her chin, walked with the grace of someone who had been trained never to falter in public. But no training in the royal family could prepare her for the sound of hundreds of people shouting, mocking, rejecting. The irony is striking. Meghan left the monarchy claiming she wanted freedom, authenticity, and Hollywood acceptance. Yet, on this night, she found something colder than royal tradition, raw public disdain. And the cruelest part? It was happening in the very industry she thought would embrace her. But it didn't stop with boos. The whispers started. Audience members pointed. Some shouted out heckles that cut deeper than the booing itself. Go home, Meghan. We don't want you here. The words rang louder than applause ever could. Words that no amount of PR spin could erase. Words that traveled across social media within seconds. And here's where the story sharpens. Meghan wasn't even on the guest list. Insiders confirmed it. Security hadn't been briefed. MTV producers hadn't scheduled a camera slot for her. She simply walked in, and the room reacted. The contradiction was stunning. The woman who had once walked into royal ceremonies with global attention now found herself unwelcome at a pop culture show. Do you see the pattern here? Meghan has spent years running from one stage to another, always searching for the place she belongs, always convinced the next platform will validate her. But this night at the VMAs showed the harshest reality. Not every stage wants her, and not every crowd will play along with the story she's trying to sell. The build-up to this moment wasn't just about Meghan arriving at the VMAs. It was about years of tension boiling over. Years of headlines, interviews, documentaries, accusations. For some, the boos weren't just about her presence that night. They were about everything she represented. The victim narrative, the Hollywood deals, the endless PR spin, and maybe, just maybe, the audience had grown tired of it all. But here's where it gets even more brutal. In the world of entertainment, perception is everything. A celebrity's brand is built on applause, admiration, association. And when boos replace cheers, the brand crumbles. For Meghan, the VMAs weren't just a public event. They were a turning point, a sign that the audience she once courted no longer wanted her in their world. And yet, Meghan stayed. She didn't turn around. She didn't rush out the way some might have. She walked deeper into the venue, forcing the moment to continue. Why? Was it pride? Was it denial? Or was it desperation? Only she knows. But the decision to stay would unleash a series of reactions, each more humiliating than the last. Because as the boos grew, as the heckles sharpened, as the cameras struggled to decide whether to show her or avoid her, something else was happening. The celebrities themselves, the true stars of the night, were reacting. Their faces, their whispers, their body language would tell a story that would spread across the internet like wildfire. And Meghan, once again, would find herself the headline, but not the way she had hoped. So let me ask you again. What happens when a duchess who once thought she could conquer Hollywood realizes Hollywood is booing her off the stage? What happens when the audience that was supposed to embrace her decides to reject her instead? Because the boos were only the beginning. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What started as murmurs had now transformed into something undeniable. The sound of boos wasn't fading, it was growing. You could feel it in the air like a storm rolling in, heavy and electric. People weren't clapping politely. They weren't shrugging and moving on. They were uniting in one voice, a voice of rejection. And then it happened. The first heckle rang out, sharp enough to pierce through the noise of the arena. Go home, Meghan. That was the moment everything shifted. This wasn't just passive disapproval anymore. It was active hostility. Imagine standing in front of thousands, expecting applause, only to hear jeers echo around you. Have you ever been in a room where the energy turns against you, where you suddenly feel like every pair of eyes is watching and judging? That's exactly what Meghan faced as she crossed into the VMAs. Let's rewind a few seconds. She had stepped onto the carpet, walking with that same measured poise she had perfected during royal engagements. A smile fixed firmly, a wave that seemed to say, "I belong here." But this wasn't Buckingham Palace, and the crowd wasn't trained to be polite. The VMAs are raw, unfiltered, unapologetic. Fans scream when they love you, and they boo when they don't. And this crowd had chosen its side the second Meghan appeared. It began with a ripple. People looked around, trying to confirm if they were seeing what they thought they were seeing. Some laughed nervously. Others pulled out their phones. And then, from somewhere deep in the audience, a voice shouted that now infamous line. It was like tossing a match into gasoline. Suddenly, others joined in. "You don't belong here. Why are you here?" And the most cutting of all, uninvited. Think about that word, uninvited. It's not just about not being on the guest list. It's about not being wanted, not being welcome. It's about stepping into a place and realizing the doors weren't opened for you. That one word carried more weight than any headline could. Now, Meghan's face told its own story. Cameras captured the flicker, the split-second shift from confidence to shock. She recovered, of course, forcing her smile wider, lifting her chin higher. But the audience wasn't fooled. They could smell the tension. They could feel her unease. And if there's one thing crowds do when they sense weakness, it's pounce. Have you ever seen a performer freeze on stage when the crowd turns? Maybe a comedian who tells a bad joke and the laughter never comes? Multiply that by 1,000, add cameras, and place it on one of the biggest pop culture stages of the year. That was Meghan's reality in those moments. But here's where it gets worse. The boos weren't confined to the back rows. They came from every corner. People in the VIP section, fans in the cheap seats, even whispers from celebrity entourages. The rejection was unanimous. It wasn't just about not being wanted. It was about being actively pushed out. And this wasn't some private humiliation. This was the VMAs. Phones were up everywhere. Live streams were already running. By the time Meghan took 10 steps inside, clips were circulating online. People at home, who weren't even at the venue, were watching in real time as she was booed. Social media timelines lit up. Did Meghan really just show up at the VMAs? Is she being booed right now? This is unreal. Let's pause here and think about the irony. Meghan has long claimed she was silenced, that she wasn't allowed to speak her truth within the royal family. Yet here she was, center stage, in a room full of people who weren't silencing her. They were rejecting her outright. The contradiction couldn't be sharper. And while Meghan tried to carry on, the security team was thrown into panic. Radios buzzed. Guards looked at each other with confusion. She wasn't scheduled. She wasn't cleared. And in an event as tightly choreographed as the VMAs, an unscheduled entrance is a nightmare. But Meghan wasn't stopping. She kept walking, forcing herself deeper into the arena. As if by sheer willpower, she could turn boos into applause. Do you think she believed it would change? Did she imagine that the crowd would suddenly soften? That maybe a celebrity would stand up and clap, sparking others to follow? That's the kind of scene her PR team might have scripted, a triumphant entrance, a comeback moment. But this wasn't a movie, and the crowd wasn't playing along. And then, just when you thought it couldn't get more brutal, the heckles sharpened. They weren't vague anymore. They were personal. Some shouted about her relationship with Harry. Others mocked her failed Netflix projects. One voice cut through the din with biting clarity. No crown here, Meghan. The words hit like a slap. A reminder that outside the palace walls, the titles she clung to didn't mean much. The atmosphere was thick with irony. Meghan once sought freedom from the formality of the monarchy. She wanted to step into Hollywood's warm embrace. But in that moment, Hollywood itself, or at least the crowd at its loudest celebration of pop culture, spat her out. And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. The boos weren't just a reaction to her presence. They were symbolic. They represented years of built-up frustration, the growing perception that Meghan was no longer the underdog she once portrayed, but a figure desperate for relevance. The crowd wasn't just booing Meghan Markle, the individual. They were booing what she had come to represent. Have you ever watched someone walk into a room convinced they own it, only to be immediately stripped of that illusion? It's painful, it's awkward, and it's unforgettable. That's why this moment didn't fade in the noise of the VMAs. It became the moment. But here's the twist. Meghan didn't leave. She didn't turn back toward the exit. She didn't signal defeat. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and pushed forward. That single decision, to stay despite the rejection, would set off an even bigger chain reaction. Because the boos were only the first layer. What happened next dragged celebrities, producers, and even the cameras themselves into the chaos. And the moment those cameras turned toward her, everything escalated beyond control. Have you ever noticed how quickly security can shift the mood of a room? 1 second, the energy belongs to the crowd. The next, a team of black-suited professionals steps in, and suddenly everyone realizes there's more happening than meets the eye. That was exactly what unfolded as Meghan Markle pushed deeper into the MTV Video Music Awards venue, refusing to turn back even as boos and heckles filled the air. Security had been caught off guard. They weren't expecting her. She wasn't on the official list. There was no red carpet handler walking her in, no carefully choreographed MTV entrance to smooth over the optics. She had walked in on her own, uninvited, and now the responsibility fell on the shoulders of a team who hadn't been briefed. Imagine the frantic chatter in their earpieces. Who cleared her? She's not on the sheet. Do we escort her out? Panic was brewing. But here's the irony. While the crowd saw Meghan as the center of attention, security saw her as a problem. An anomaly. A disruption in an otherwise carefully managed night of live television. Now think about this contradiction. Meghan was used to security that bowed to her presence. Royal bodyguards once moved mountains to keep her safe, shielded, protected. But here, in this Hollywood arena, the guards weren't deferential. They weren't impressed. They were confused, and confusion quickly turns into tension. The audience noticed. Fans sitting close to the stage caught the hurried whispers, the nervous movements of guards. They watched as security circled in, not to clear the way for her like they once did in royal processions, but to block, to contain, to figure out what to do next. The irony was glaring. The woman who had once claimed the crown was now treated like a gatecrasher. And Meghan? She knew it. You could see it in the way her smile stiffened. She kept her chin high, but her eyes darted toward the black-suited men who were suddenly all around her. Was she about to be escorted out? Was she about to face the unthinkable? Public removal from an event where she desperately wanted to be seen? The crowd sensed it too. Have you ever been in an audience when tension rises and people lean in, waiting for the fallout? The VMA's audience was eating it up. Some booed louder. Others laughed. A few even started chanting, mocking her presence. Phones were up everywhere, capturing the chaos from every angle. Clips were already making their way to TikTok and X, complete with captions. Meghan gets kicked out. Security swarms Markle at VMAs. But here's the twist. Security didn't escort her out. At least, not yet. They stalled, radioing backstage, trying to figure out how to handle the situation without turning it into a bigger scandal than it already was. Because imagine the optics. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, physically removed from the VMAs in front of thousands, broadcast to millions. That kind of moment would overshadow the entire awards show. So instead, they hovered, close enough to control the situation, far enough to avoid escalation. And in that awkward middle ground, Meghan stood frozen in a spotlight she hadn't planned for. The boos thundered louder, and the heckles grew crueler. And she had to decide, fight through it or retreat. But Meghan chose something else. She ignored security. She ignored the chance. She pressed forward as if nothing was happening. A forced smile on her lips, a wave to no one in particular, a posture of defiance. She was going to claim her space, even if the crowd rejected her. And this decision, this refusal to retreat, pushed the night into an even darker spiral. Because the moment Meghan kept moving, security had to follow. Now it wasn't just one or two guards at her side. It was an entire detail surrounding her, blocking off pathways, steering her away from high-profile sections. And the more they moved, the more attention they drew. Here's the contradiction. Meghan had come to be seen, to be noticed, to reclaim the Hollywood stage. And she succeeded, but not the way she wanted. She was seen not as a star, but as a spectacle. Not as a welcome guest, but as an uninvited outsider. Let me ask you this. Have you ever walked into a place where you weren't welcome, but pride kept you from turning back? That's the exact energy Meghan radiated. Pride battling humiliation. Determination masking fear. But pride can only take you so far before reality crashes in. Because as she pushed deeper into the venue, the heckles became more targeted. Not your stage, Meghan, one voice bellowed. Another mocked her Netflix failures, shouting, "Where's your show now?" The crowd wasn't just booing anymore. They were cataloging her failures. Every broken deal, every public misstep, every contradiction in her carefully crafted narrative was thrown back at her in raw, unfiltered sound. And here's the thing about public humiliation. It feeds itself. The more people joined in, the bolder others became. Soon, it wasn't just individuals shouting, it was groups. Entire clusters of audience members laughing, booing, chanting. The sound built until it drowned out everything else. Meghan's forced smile looked smaller and smaller under the weight of it. Meanwhile, security wasn't just concerned about the optics anymore. They were concerned about escalation. What if the crowd turned physical? What if an object was thrown? What if someone rushed the floor to confront her? Their job wasn't to protect Meghan's image. Their job was to prevent chaos. And in that moment, Meghan's very presence had become chaos itself. So what did they do? They tightened their circle. They radioed harder. And backstage, producers debated a question they never thought they'd face. Do we cut her off completely? Do we stop this before it ruins the entire broadcast? And just when you thought it couldn't get any more intense, the cameras turned. Yes, the MTV cameras. The ones feeding the live broadcast. Suddenly, there she was, framed in the shot, her smile trembling as boos echoed through the arena. The producers tried to cut away quickly, but not quickly enough. Millions at home had already caught it. Screenshots spread instantly. The humiliation was now official. It wasn't just in the room. It was global. And that's when the heckles reached their cruelest point. Someone near the front shouted, "You're not a duchess here." The words hit like a knife. They stripped her of the title she still clung to, reducing her to just another uninvited face in a room full of stars. Meghan's eyes flickered. For the first time, her composure cracked. And though she forced her chin up once again, everyone watching knew it. The room had beaten her. But here's the question. Would she finally retreat, admitting defeat? Would she allow herself to be escorted out, sparing herself more humiliation? Or would she cling even tighter, forcing the night into even darker territory? Because in the next few moments, Meghan made a choice that stunned even her critics. And it wasn't the choice anyone expected. What do you do when the entire world is watching, waiting for you to collapse? Do you run, tail between your legs, and disappear into the shadows? Or do you stand taller, daring everyone to keep booing, as if their rejection fuels your defiance? That was the impossible crossroads Meghan Markle faced in that arena, under the blinding lights of the MTV VMAs. And the choice she made wasn't to retreat. It was to double down. Instead of backing out quietly, Meghan inched further toward the heart of the venue. Every step was a contradiction, grace mixed with stubbornness, pride entangled with desperation. She wasn't walking like a guest. She was walking like someone trying to prove she belonged, even when every voice in the room was screaming the opposite. And that's when it happened. The heckling, which had been scattered, suddenly grew into a full eruption. It wasn't one or two voices anymore. It was dozens, maybe even hundreds, overlapping and clashing, forming a chaotic chorus. Words no longer whispered in shadows, but hurled at full volume. Go back to Montecito. You don't belong here. Uninvited. Uninvited. The chants took on a rhythm, a cruel echo bouncing off the walls. People weren't just mocking Meghan. They were performing it, feeding off one another. The crowd had found a villain, and Meghan was it. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever seen how quickly a crowd can turn into a single organism? One spark and suddenly thousands are unified in a single action. It's exhilarating when they're cheering. But when they're booing, when they're tearing someone down in unison, it's terrifying. And Meghan was at the center of it, smiling through gritted teeth while her very identity was being shredded in real time. Security tightened again, creating a buffer. But even their presence added to the spectacle. To the crowd, the guards circling her weren't a symbol of her importance. They were confirmation of the chaos. Proof that her appearance wasn't normal, wasn't planned, wasn't welcome. And then came the most humiliating blow yet. The cameras, those ruthless, unblinking eyes of the VMAs, caught the moment. Meghan standing there, heckles raining down, her forced smile trembling as if it might collapse at any second. Producers cut away again, but not before millions at home saw enough to understand. Something was wrong. Something unscripted. Something raw. Do you know what happens when live television slips out of control? It doesn't vanish. It multiplies. Viewers rewind. They clip. They post. Within minutes, TikTok was flooded. X, Twitter, lit up. Instagram stories spread the clips like wildfire. Hashtags emerged. Mocking, brutal, unforgettable. And Meghan? She was still standing there, pretending to wave as though the cheers were louder than the jeers. It was a performance within a performance. One person's attempt to rewrite reality while the truth blared louder and louder. Here's the cruel irony. Meghan has built her post-royal life on controlling the narrative. Carefully staged interviews, glossy documentaries, hand-picked photographers. But the VMAs didn't play by her rules. She couldn't cut the footage. She couldn't demand edits. She couldn't silence the hecklers. The crowd owned the narrative now, and their story was very different from hers. At this point, even celebrities in the audience began to react. Some turned their heads away, pretending not to notice. Others whispered to their seatmates, their eyes darting toward Meghan with disbelief. And a few couldn't help but smirk, not cruelly, but knowingly. They recognized the spectacle for what it was, the moment Hollywood itself rejected her. But Meghan refused to crumble. She pressed forward, chin high, pretending the noise was beneath her. And that's when the most shocking twist unfolded. A voice, not from the cheap seats, but from a section close to the stage, rose above the rest. "Sit down, Meghan." The words cut through the entire arena, amplified by the acoustics. The crowd erupted again, some laughing, some booing louder. But here's the detail that made this moment unforgettable. The voice belonged to someone recognizable. Not a random fan, not a heckler from the back, but a figure sitting among the VIPs. Someone whose reaction mattered. The cameras didn't show it, of course, but witnesses swore they saw a celebrity, one of the night's performers, smirk as they mouthed those words. And if there's one thing the internet loves, it's a celebrity feud. Within minutes, speculation ran wild. Who said it? Who dared to call out Meghan, openly, in front of the world? The tension reached its peak. Meghan froze for a second. Her wave faltered. Her eyes flickered toward the section where the voice had come from. For the first time, her mask cracked. And that crack was all the audience needed. Because once they saw her flinch, they knew the boos had landed. They knew the heckles had pierced. And the cruelty intensified. More chants. More laughter. The sound swelling into something almost unbearable. Have you ever been in a moment so humiliating that time slows down? That every second feels stretched, heavy, suffocating? That was Meghan's reality. What should have been a 30-second walk into the venue now felt like an eternity. Each step was a battle. Each second was another dagger. But Meghan still didn't leave. That stubborn pride kept her rooted, as if leaving would mean defeat. And maybe it would have. Maybe walking out would have been the final admission that she wasn't wanted. So she stayed. And yet, her staying only made it worse. The chants grew uglier. The heckles more personal. Every movement she made, every smile she forced, became material for mockery. The cameras might have cut away, but the phones didn't. Clips of her faltering smile, her frozen wave, her tight posture spread like wildfire. And the whispers among the celebrities grew louder. Who invited her? Why was she here? And, more damningly, why wasn't she leaving? Because the truth was now undeniable. Meghan wasn't just facing boos. She was facing a room, an industry, and a culture that had turned its back on her. And for the first time, she couldn't spin it away. But just when it seemed the humiliation had reached its breaking point, something even more dramatic unfolded. One of the biggest stars of the night, a headliner, someone the audience adored, reacted in a way that no one expected. And their reaction didn't just seal Meghan's fate. It sent the entire internet into overdrive. What happens when a room full of stars, millions of eyes glued to the stage, suddenly fixates on one reaction? Not the boos of the crowd, not the heckles echoing from every corner, but the response of a single A-list celebrity. That was the turning point. The moment when humiliation stopped being noise and became a spectacle. The crowd had already made their stance clear. They didn't want Meghan there. But when one of the night's biggest stars, a performer adored by the audience, visibly reacted, the story shifted from whispers to headlines. And it happened in seconds. Picture this. The cameras were roaming, cutting between stage, audience, and backstage chaos. Meghan stood stiff, her smile stretched thin, while security tried to corral the energy. Then, the camera landed briefly on the front rows, and there it was. A smirk, a raised eyebrow, a shake of the head. The celebrity didn't even need to speak. Body language alone carried the message. The audience caught it instantly. Phones zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression. Social media exploded. Did you see their face when Meghan walked in? This reaction says it all. And that's the irony. Meghan had come to the VMAs, uninvited, in hopes of being noticed. And she was noticed, just not for the reason she wanted. Her very presence had triggered a chain reaction, culminating in the silent judgment of one star whose opinion mattered more than any heckle. Now, ask yourself, why does a celebrity's reaction matter so much? Because in Hollywood, perception is currency. A-list approval can make or break careers. And when one of the most respected figures on stage gives even the slightest look of disapproval, it becomes gospel. The crowd felt validated. The boos grew louder. The heckles sharper. Meghan wasn't just rejected by the audience. She was rejected by her peers. But here's where the contradiction deepens. Meghan didn't falter. Not yet. She straightened, as though daring the star, the crowd, the cameras to keep watching. She waved again. She smiled harder. And in doing so, she gave the crowd even more to feed on. Have you ever seen someone smile while drowning? That was Meghan. The facade of composure clashing with the brutal reality of mass rejection. Every second she stood there, the chasm between her intent and perception widened. She wanted to look unshakable, but the longer she stayed, the more fragile she appeared. And then came the moment that tipped everything. The celebrity didn't stay silent. They leaned over to a seatmate, whispered something, and laughed. The cameras didn't catch the words, but the audience around them did. Eyewitnesses swore they heard a single line, sharp as glass. She doesn't belong here. Those words weren't amplified by a microphone. They didn't need to be. In a room already charged with tension, even the rumor of those words spread like wildfire. Within minutes, people online were speculating. Who said it, and why? Theories sprouted like weeds. Clips of the star's smirk were dissected frame by frame. Lip readers weighed in, and every version of the story pointed back to one thing. Hollywood's elite had spoken, and Meghan was on the outside. Think about the irony. Meghan had positioned herself as a bridge between royalty and celebrity. She had walked away from the monarchy believing Hollywood would embrace her. And now, right here, in the most public arena of pop culture, Hollywood wasn't just ignoring her. It was mocking her, rejecting her. The crowd fed off the energy. The boos turned into chants again, only this time louder, more unified. Go home, Meghan. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It was a performance of its own. People swayed with the rhythm, recording themselves joining in. TikTok videos spliced live clips with sarcastic captions. The humiliation multiplied in real time. And Meghan's body language betrayed her. She stood taller, yes, but her hands clenched tighter. Her eyes darted more quickly. Her smile slipped more often. The audience saw it. They knew they were breaking her, and that knowledge only emboldened them. Do you see the contradiction? Meghan had built her image on resilience, on rising above criticism, on projecting strength in the face of adversity. But this moment revealed the cracks, and the cracks were spreading fast. Now let's zoom out. The VMAs have always thrived on drama. Controversy is the currency of the show, but rarely has the drama been this raw, this unplanned. The producers backstage scrambled, unsure of what to do. Should they cut away entirely? Should they instruct security to remove her? Or should they let it play out, knowing full well the spectacle was now the story? And here's the brutal truth. They chose to let it play out. Because controversy drives ratings. And Meghan's humiliation had just become the most talked about moment of the night. Meanwhile, Meghan kept moving, as if forward momentum could somehow erase the jeers. But every step carried her deeper into the heart of rejection. She passed clusters of celebrities whose expressions ranged from disbelief to amusement. Some turned away. Others stared openly. A few whispered to their entourages, their gestures betraying their disapproval. The narrative was no longer just about the crowd. It was about the entire room. Meghan had turned herself into the focal point of the night, and every reaction around her became part of the story. Now let me ask you, what hurts more? The boos of strangers or the judgment of peers? Meghan could pretend to ignore the chants, but the silent smirks of Hollywood's elite? The whispered mockery from the very people she wanted to align with? That kind of rejection lingers far longer. And yet, Meghan refused to give in. Her pride wouldn't allow it. She sat down in the audience, flanked by security, as if daring the cameras to keep rolling. She acted as though she had every right to be there. But the crowd knew better. The stars knew better. And the internet knew best of all. Because within minutes, the narrative crystallized online. Meghan Markle had been booed, heckled, and publicly rejected at the VMAs, not by tabloids, not by distant critics, but by the people in the industry she wanted to call her own. But the story didn't end there. Because just when the crowd thought they had seen it all, just when Meghan thought she had weathered the worst of it, something happened backstage. A conversation, a confrontation, a decision, one that would take the humiliation from public to personal. And when the truth of that moment leaked, it left Meghan more exposed than ever before. What happens when humiliation doesn't just unfold in front of the cameras, but behind the scenes where the real power lies? What happens when the noise of the crowd is replaced by the whispers of executives, the cold calculations of producers, and the blunt voices of security asking a question no one ever thought they'd have to ask? Do we remove her? That was the reality backstage at the MTV Video Music Awards 2025. While Meghan Markle sat stiffly in the audience, pretending to belong, a storm was brewing behind the curtains. Producers, showrunners, and security staff were huddled, voices low but urgent, debating what to do with the woman who had turned their carefully scripted spectacle into chaos. Think about this contradiction. The VMAs thrive on drama. They want outrageous outfits, viral moments, feuds that ignite the internet. But there's a line between drama that entertains and chaos that derails. Meghan's entrance, uninvited, booed, heckled, had crossed that line. What should have been a night celebrating music was now dominated by the question of her presence. And that's when the confrontation began. According to whispers that leaked later, a senior producer pulled aside MTV security with a simple directive: "We need to handle this." But what did handle mean? Escort her out? Block the cameras from showing her? Or quietly isolate her so the humiliation didn't escalate further? Each option carried risks. Imagine the optics if they physically removed Meghan Markle. Clips of her being escorted out would overshadow every performance, every award, every headline. But imagine letting her stay. The boos weren't stopping. The chants weren't dying. And the show's reputation was on the line. Security radios buzzed. Backstage assistants scurried between control rooms. Even some of the artists' managers were pulled into the conversation, worried their clients' big moments were being overshadowed by Meghan's scandal. The tension was palpable. And then, the whispers grew darker. An insider reportedly revealed later that one executive asked the blunt question, "Who let her in?" That's the twist, isn't it? Meghan hadn't been on the guest list. She hadn't been cleared. So how did she walk into one of the most secure, tightly managed entertainment events in the world? The answer wasn't clear that night. Some claimed her name had been dropped by a sympathetic insider. Others suggested she'd used her Duchess title to push past checkpoints. Whatever the case, her very presence had become an unsolvable problem. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever been somewhere you weren't supposed to be, and every second felt like someone might tap you on the shoulder and say, "You don't belong here"? That was Meghan's reality, only amplified by millions of eyes, by chants echoing in her ears, by whispers circling backstage. And yet, instead of finding a way to quietly defuse the situation, Meghan's decision to sit in the audience only forced producers to act faster. If she'd walked out, maybe it would have ended there. But by staying, she dared them to confront her. And confront her they did. Reports claimed that a senior MTV official approached her team, or what remained of it. A quiet but firm conversation. Meghan was told she could stay, but she would not be featured on camera again. No cutaways. No reaction shots. Nothing that gave her legitimacy as part of the event. In essence, she was invisible. Think about the cruelty of that decision. Meghan, who came to the VMAs for attention, to be seen, to reclaim the spotlight, was instead told she would be erased from the broadcast. Present, but invisible. Sitting there while the cameras panned right past her, capturing everyone else but her. That's humiliation on another level. But the confrontation didn't stop there. Security added another condition. She couldn't roam freely. No backstage passes. No mingling with stars. No photo ops. Her movements were restricted to her seat, as if she were a disruptive guest being babysat until she left. For Meghan, who had once walked palaces freely, the irony was devastating. From royalty to restricted. From Duchess to monitored. And here's the part that made the story explode online. Whispers suggest that one celebrity, furious about the disruption, confronted producers directly. "Why is she even here?" they reportedly asked. Imagine that, an A-lister demanding answers about Meghan's presence, pushing the humiliation from whispers into direct confrontation. The producers had no choice but to admit the truth. She hadn't been invited. The room froze. Even among the chaos, the acknowledgement hit like a thunderclap. Meghan wasn't just unwelcome. She was unauthorized. And that revelation spread through the celebrity rose like wildfire. Can you picture the whispers? The side glances? The smirks of disbelief as stars realized Meghan wasn't supposed to be there at all? For an audience built on exclusivity, on the power of access, this was the ultimate sin. She hadn't been chosen. She had forced her way in. And what happens when someone forces their way into a world that doesn't want them? They're rejected. Brutally. Publicly. Unforgivingly. Meghan, of course, tried to mask it. She smiled when the cameras caught her in the background. She clapped politely during performances. She whispered with her security detail as if they were her entourage. But the truth was visible in her body language. Shoulders tight, eyes darting, smile fixed but fading. And the audience knew it. They kept booing, heckling, mocking, louder each time the spotlight even hinted at her section. It became a game, a ritual. And backstage, the executives let it happen, because in a cruel twist of irony, Meghan had become the drama the VMAs thrived on. But the whispers backstage didn't end there. Some claimed Harry called. Others said Meghan's team begged producers not to remove her. And then, in one of the most shocking rumors to emerge, insiders whispered that Meghan herself demanded a chance to address the crowd. Can you imagine? In the middle of a show already derailed, the most controversial figure in the room allegedly wanted the microphone. The request, of course, was denied. But the fact she asked only deepened the divide. For some, it proved her desperation. For others, her delusion. And for the audience, it confirmed what they'd suspected all along. Meghan wasn't there to support artists or celebrate music. She was there for herself. And that's why the rejection hurt so deeply. Because no matter how high she held her chin, no matter how bright she smiled, no one in that room was fooled. Meghan wasn't a guest. She was an intruder. Yet the night wasn't over. The humiliation, already unbearable, was about to escalate even further. Because while the crowd's boos were vicious and the backstage whispers were damning, the final blow came not from strangers or producers, but from one celebrity's reaction caught on camera and broadcast everywhere. And when that reaction went viral, Meghan's VMAs disaster was sealed forever. What happens when a single glance, a fleeting expression, says more than 1,000 boos ever could? What happens when one of the most powerful figures in the room decides, without a word, to join the rejection? That was the moment that turned Meghan Markle's awkward humiliation into a cultural earthquake. The boos were already echoing. The heckles had already drawn blood. But all of that was noise, background chaos. What elevated the humiliation to another level was the reaction of one A-lister, caught squarely on camera, broadcast to millions at home, and replayed endlessly online. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't polite. It wasn't subtle. It was raw, real, ruthless. The camera panned across the audience during a performance transition. In the front row, seated among other megastars, was the celebrity the world least expected to react. And there it was, a visible grimace, a look of disbelief, a muttered phrase that lip readers would later dissect frame by frame. Some swore they saw the words, "Why is she here?" Others claimed it was, "She doesn't belong." Whatever the exact phrase, the meaning was unmistakable. This wasn't a fan heckling from the cheap seats. This was a cultural heavyweight, someone Hollywood listened to, someone with influence and credibility. And in that split-second reaction, Meghan's presence was delegitimized on a scale that no PR spin could undo. Let me ask you this. Have you ever seen a group fall silent because one respected voice spoke? Or in this case, didn't even need to speak, just reacted? That's what this was. A crowd already energized by boos suddenly felt vindicated. Their rejection had just been validated by the elite. And the internet? The internet went feral. Clips spread faster than wildfire. On TikTok, the grimace was slowed down, zoomed in, captioned with snarky text. On X, Twitter, side-by-side memes popped up, Meghan smiling desperately on one side, the celebrity grimacing on the other. Instagram flooded with reaction reels. When Meghan shows up uninvited to your party. The humiliation was no longer confined to the arena. It was global, amplified by the very platforms Meghan once relied on to cultivate her image. Now here's the twist. Meghan saw it. You could see the flicker in her eyes as she registered the reaction, as though the air had been sucked out of her lungs. She wasn't just facing faceless hecklers anymore. She was facing peers, colleagues, the people she once believed she could stand alongside. And they weren't with her. They were against her. Contradiction is at the heart of this moment. Meghan had spent years arguing that the British monarchy rejected her, that the palace never supported her, that she had to leave to find acceptance elsewhere. And yet, when she turned to Hollywood, the so-called promised land of acceptance, she found the exact same thing, rejection. Different accents. Same result. The cameras cut quickly, but the damage was done. The internet doesn't need long clips. A few seconds is enough to immortalize humiliation. And this few seconds became the defining image of the night. Not a musical performance, not an award speech, not even a scandalous fashion choice, but Meghan Markle, grimacing internally while the world watched a superstar dismiss her presence in real time. Do you know what's worse than being booed? Being ignored by those you crave approval from. And do you know what's worse than being ignored? Being openly mocked by them. Meghan's nightmare wasn't just the chance of go home or the whispers of uninvited. It was this. Hollywood's elites signaling, clearly, that she wasn't one of them. From that moment on, the energy in the room shifted again. The boos became less chaotic, more gleeful. The heckles turned sharper, more confident. Because when the crowd realized that even celebrities were joining in, they felt untouchable. They weren't just booing. They were enforcing a collective rejection. And Meghan? She sat frozen, her body rigid, her wave faltering. She clapped when the rest of the audience clapped, but too late, too forced. She smiled when the cameras swept the room, but too tightly, too brittle. Every move she made was another meme waiting to happen. Have you ever tried to blend into a crowd while knowing the crowd doesn't want you there? It's impossible. The harder you try to appear normal, the more obvious you become. That's what Meghan endured for the rest of the show. A ghost in the room, visible only in the moments that made her humiliation worse. And still, she didn't leave. Pride wouldn't let her. Pride chained her to that seat. Because leaving would mean admitting defeat. Leaving would mean acknowledging the crowd had won. And Meghan Markle doesn't leave. Not when she thinks she can still salvage something. But here's where the story twists again. While Meghan forced herself to endure the jeers, something else was happening backstage. That celebrity reaction, the grimace, the muttered phrase, had sparked a chain of whispers among other stars. Conversations began. Opinions were voiced. And soon, the rejection wasn't just in the crowd. It was spreading among the VIPs themselves. Imagine the scene. Clusters of celebrities leaning together, shaking their heads, murmuring, "Why did she come? Who let her in? What is she doing?" The gossip wasn't subtle anymore. It was open, visible. Meghan had come to insert herself into Hollywood's most flamboyant celebration, and instead, she had become the butt of its jokes. And then came the ultimate sting. Someone, an A-lister with a sharp tongue and no fear of controversy, didn't keep their reaction private. They said something out loud. Loud enough to be heard by those around them. Loud enough to be repeated. And when that comment reached social media, it didn't just fuel the fire. It poured gasoline on it. Because it wasn't just a reaction anymore. It was an open call-out. And Meghan's humiliation, already global, was about to become unforgettable. What's worse than being booed by strangers? Being called out by someone whose words carry real weight, right there in the middle of the chaos. That's exactly what happened next. The humiliation Meghan thought couldn't get any deeper suddenly found a new floor, and it came from the lips of someone she could not ignore. The crowd had been loud, relentless, unified in their chants. The celebrity reaction had already gone viral. But the real dagger came when one voice, clear and undeniable, rang out from the VIP section. A voice that didn't just join the heckling, but elevated it, made it sharper, more personal, more impossible to dismiss. "She doesn't belong here." That's what witnesses swear they heard. And this wasn't a heckler in the rafters. This wasn't a drunk fan yelling from the back. This was a star. Someone seated close enough for Meghan to hear every word. Someone respected enough that when they spoke, the audience listened. And once those words hit the air, the room didn't just boo louder, it roared. Now, pause for a second and think about the contradiction. Meghan came to Hollywood to be embraced. To find a home outside the monarchy that she painted as cold, rigid, and unwelcoming. She thought Hollywood would love her because she was one of them now. An actress, a celebrity, a storyteller. But the moment those words cut through the air, Hollywood wasn't her refuge anymore. It was her rejection, and Meghan felt it. The cameras may not have zoomed in, but the crowd did. Eyewitnesses swear her smile faltered. Her posture stiffened. Her hands, once clasped in a delicate wave, curled into fists. Every movement screamed the same thing. She had been pierced. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt out of place, and then someone said the exact thing you were afraid everyone was thinking? That's what this was. Meghan's deepest fear, not being wanted, not belonging, was shouted for everyone to hear. And it didn't just echo in the arena. It echoed across social media within seconds. Clips appeared online almost instantly. Videos captioned, "The moment Hollywood rejected Meghan Markle." TikToks slowed down the audio, amplifying the voice, circling Meghan's frozen reaction with bright red arrows. Hashtags like #SheDoesn'tBelong and #Uninvited trended worldwide before the show even ended. But here's where the irony stung the most. Meghan had once claimed that she was silenced by the monarchy, that she was denied her place in that world. And yet, here she was, trying to carve out space in Hollywood, and being told, openly, loudly, that she didn't belong there either. Silenced in one world, rejected in another. The crowd fed on it. The boos became chants again, but this time more precise, more unified. Doesn't belong. Doesn't belong. Thousands of voices, mocking, repeating, hammering the point home. Meghan had wanted the spotlight. Now the spotlight was burning her alive. And the celebrities around her? They weren't rescuing her. They weren't stepping in to defend her. They looked away. Some smirked. A few shook their heads. But no one, not a single Hollywood heavyweight, stood up for Meghan. That silence said everything. Now, let me ask you, what hurts more, being booed by strangers or being abandoned by the people you thought might support you? Meghan could ignore the hecklers in the nosebleeds. But she couldn't ignore the A-listers sitting feet away, refusing to meet her eyes, refusing to acknowledge her presence. And yet, Meghan didn't leave. She sat there, chin high, smile forced, clapping too late, too hard, at performances she clearly wasn't even hearing. Every move she made was more material for ridicule. Every attempt at composure looked like desperation. The contradiction between her image and her reality had never been clearer. Meanwhile, backstage, MTV producers were buzzing. That celebrity's comment hadn't just stirred the crowd. It had shifted the tone of the night. They knew the internet was already exploding. They knew Meghan's humiliation had eclipsed the show itself. And yet, they let it play out, because controversy is currency. Meghan was now the headline, just not in the way she had hoped. And the cruelty didn't stop there. During one commercial break, insiders claim another celebrity leaned over to a seatmate and whispered something even more biting. "This isn't her stage." The words weren't caught on camera, but enough people nearby heard them. And soon, those whispers joined the online frenzy. Another layer of rejection, another viral moment, another knife in Meghan's public image. By now, Meghan had become the ghost of the show. Not officially part of it, not celebrated, not included, but haunting every moment nonetheless. The crowd buzzed with anticipation each time the cameras panned the audience, waiting to see if they'd catch another glimpse of her. When they didn't, they booed anyway, chanting her name with venom, forcing her into the spotlight even when the broadcast tried to erase her. And Meghan? She sat there, trapped, surrounded by a wall of sound that only grew louder, sharper, crueler. Each heckle was a reminder. She wasn't welcome. Each chant was a verdict. She didn't belong. But here's the question that lingered in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Why didn't she leave? Why, when the humiliation reached levels most people couldn't endure, did she stay glued to that seat? Was it pride? Was it denial? Or was it desperation? The desperate belief that leaving would mean conceding the battle once and for all. Whatever the reason, her decision to stay only fueled the humiliation further. Because the night wasn't done with her yet. The crowd wasn't finished. The celebrities weren't silent. And the cameras, no matter how much producers tried to avoid her, couldn't resist forever. Because the next time Meghan's face appeared on screen, the entire arena erupted into something even darker than boos. And that sound would follow her long after the lights of the VMAs faded. Have you ever heard a sound so unified, so overwhelming, that it didn't just fill the room? It rattled the soul of the person it was directed at? That's what happened when Meghan Markle's face flashed back onto the massive VMA screens. The producers tried to cut away quickly, but it was too late. The audience saw her, and the reaction was instant, brutal, and unforgettable. The boos that had started as scattered jeers earlier in the night now erupted into a deafening wave. Louder, sharper, crueler. But this time, it wasn't just booing. It was chanting. Organized, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. Go home, go home, go home. The chant rolled through the arena like thunder, shaking the walls. Thousands of voices pounding in unison, all directed at one woman sitting in a sea of celebrities. Meghan sat stiff, her smile frozen, her hands clapping out of sync with everyone else's, as if pretending not to hear what the entire world was screaming at her. Have you ever tried to pretend something isn't happening when every fiber of your body knows it is? That's the contradiction Meghan found herself living in that moment. Outwardly, she smiled. Inwardly, the humiliation was undeniable. The cameras cut away again, desperate to salvage the show, but the damage was already done. Clips of the crowd chanting, "Go home," were spreading across TikTok, Instagram, and X within seconds. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Go Home Meghan. Hashtag VMA Heckle. Hashtag Uninvited Duchess. By the time the next performer took the stage, Meghan was already the #1 trending topic worldwide. Now here's where the story twists. The chant didn't stay confined to the arena. People at home started recording themselves chanting along, posting videos mocking Meghan's humiliation. Memes appeared, overlaying the chant onto old footage of her royal wedding, her Oprah interview, even her Netflix promo clips. The internet turned the VMAs into a referendum on Meghan Markle, and she lost. But inside the arena, the atmosphere was something even rawer. Celebrities who had been whispering before now openly turned their heads to see how Meghan would react. Some smirked, some shook their heads, others simply looked away, unwilling to be caught on camera near her. The silence of the stars, paired with the volume of the crowd, created an emotional contradiction. Meghan was surrounded by people, but utterly alone. And yet, she stayed seated. That's the part people couldn't understand. She didn't walk out. She didn't retreat. She didn't let security escort her away. She sat there, chin high, eyes darting, hands clapping too hard at performances she clearly wasn't paying attention to. Was it pride? Was it defiance? Or was it the desperate belief that if she endured long enough, the tide would somehow turn in her favor? Think about that. How many of us would have stayed? How many of us would have sat through an entire arena chanting for us to leave? Most people would crumble. Most would run. But Meghan didn't. And that stubbornness, instead of salvaging her image, only deepened the humiliation. Because the chant didn't fade. It returned. Again and again. Every time the cameras even hinted at her section, the crowd erupted. Go home. Uninvited. At one point, eyewitnesses claim, a few people even stood up, pointing toward her as they shouted, turning the chant into a performance of its own. And here's the cruel irony. Meghan had once walked into royal ceremonies with the eyes of the world upon her, the applause of thousands echoing in her ears. She had lived that fantasy, basked in that adoration. But now, in Hollywood, the place she thought would embrace her, the eyes of the world were still upon her. Only this time, they weren't clapping. They were tearing her down, united in rejection. The emotional weight of that irony is staggering. From palaces to pop culture arenas, Meghan's journey had come full circle. And the message was the same: she didn't belong. Now, let's zoom in on Meghan in that moment. Witnesses described her posture. Her back rigid, her jaw clenched, her smile too wide, too forced, her hands gripping the armrests of her seat between awkward claps. And her eyes, the eyes that betrayed everything. Wide, darting, scanning the room as if searching for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But no one did. Not one celebrity stood up. Not one leaned over to comfort her. Not one smiled back in solidarity. The silence of her peers was deafening. And that silence spoke louder than the chants. Ask yourself, what's more devastating? The noise of rejection or the quiet of abandonment? Meghan had both. And she had it in the most public arena possible. And then came the moment that sealed it. A performer took the stage, one of the night's biggest names. The crowd was still buzzing, still chanting. And as the performer addressed the audience, they paused. They smirked. And they said a single line that wasn't scripted, wasn't planned, but landed like a dagger. Some people just don't know when they're not invited. The crowd erupted. Laughter, cheers, more chants. The performer went on with their set, but the damage was already done. That line became the headline. The unofficial summary of Meghan's entire night. Imagine sitting in that seat, thousands laughing at your expense, millions watching at home, social media dissecting every second. Imagine hearing your humiliation turned into a punchline by one of the very stars you hoped to align yourself with. That's the level of rejection Meghan endured. And yet, she stayed. Every second of her stubbornness only fed the narrative. Every forced smile, every awkward clap, every desperate glance became another meme, another viral clip. By the time the final award of the night was handed out, Meghan wasn't just a guest who had been booed. She was the story of the show, the scandal, the humiliation that overshadowed every winner, every performance, every headline. But the humiliation didn't end when the lights went down. Because while Meghan endured the chants inside the arena, something else was happening outside, something that would make the fallout even worse. Fans, paparazzi, journalists. They were waiting. And when Meghan finally left that arena, the boos inside were nothing compared to the storm she walked into outside.